There's something about fishing that stirs up an energy and excitement from deep within us. It could come from landing a personal best fish or by helping someone land their first fish ever. It's stories shared around the dinner table, and after a day on the water, the goal of learning more about the wonders that surround us. To us, it's the things that give our lives purpose and meaning. These are the stories told by the avid, the dedicated, and the passionate. This is the Love of Fishing Podcast. The Love of Fishing Podcast is proudly powered by Peter's Tackle and sponsored by Freedom Tackle, Silver Salmon, Dreamweaver, Team Underdog Cutbait, and Grimsby Tackle. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Love of Fishing Podcast, powered by Peter's Tackle. I'm your host, Lyle Gator, and I'd like to thank you for tuning into this week's show. We have another good one on our hands here, guys. If you're into carp fishing, this is going to be your week. We're talking to Andrew Walker, who's actually represented Canada over in France at the World Carp Classic. Andrew's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to carp fishing European style. If you're listening on YouTube, thank you very much for subscribing. And if you are listening on Spotify, thank you for joining the Love of Fishing Podcast community. For those of you who are listening on YouTube, don't forget that you can listen on Spotify this year and take the show anywhere that you go. It has been great to be broadcasting on both platforms this year, and I hope that if you're a new viewer or listener to the show, that you've been enjoying it so far. Thanks again. Before we jump into our discussion with Andrew, there's a few people that I need to thank for their generous support of the show and for making it possible this year. Big thank you goes to Freedom Tackle, the Silver Salmon Challenge, Grimsby Tackle, Team Underdog Cutbait, and Team Dreamweaver for their continued support of the Love of Fishing Podcast. Guys, I know that when you hit the stores for some fishing shopping, you have a lot of options. Try and remember these people because they love fishing too. Without any further ado, let's jump into our discussion with Andrew Walker. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Love of Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Gator, and today I'm joined by Andrew Walker, who operates Cast and Conquer Guide Service. He's located on the Quebec side of Hawkesbury, just east of Ottawa. Andrew is a multi-species angler who specializes in catching trophy fish, from crappies to muskie on open water and in the boat. He's been fishing since the age of 3, and he's also represented Canada at the World Carp Classic. He has a YouTube channel, and we're lucky to have him on the show today. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey man, how's it going?
Great. I'm excited to talk to you because we share a lot of the same species that we target with our guiding, but we're in very different areas. And I started talking to you a couple weeks ago. We were actually out on the ice with our mutual friend Maddie, and we struck up conversation, and you started talking about carp fishing. So today I really want to hear about your carp fishing adventures and a little bit about your guide service in the Ottawa area.
Perfect.
So tell me about how you got started in carp fishing.
So I'm from I guess not Northern Ontario, but Deep River, which is about 2.5 hours northwest of Ottawa. And when I was growing up there, I targeted everything that you target in Northern Ontario: smallies, largies, pike, the odd muskie. So I moved to Quebec at 21, and when I moved there, all my friends were fishing this shore spot, and they were like, we keep catching these fish, and they look like giant suckers, and they're like 20, 25 pounds, but we get 1 in 10 in because they're using medium heavy spinning reels with 15-pound tests. So
yeah,
I go and we set up one night, and that's what it is. We end up having 4 runs, and at that time, I'm taking my rod with 15-pound braid and putting it in a PVC that I pound into the ground and having the rod go straight up in the air with a bell on it. So we end up over the course of maybe a 2 or 3 week period, having a bunch of fish, but losing more. So we'd be upgrading our line, getting bigger tests, bigger rods. And then eventually that fall came and it froze. I started watching a lot more Euro carping, so Nash videos and Corda videos, and started getting the feel for how to do my own hair rigs. And I really wanted to target them on the ice. So I reached out to some guys that were carpers, and they told me you can't do it on the ice. It's impossible. They they get really lethargic and bury themselves in the mud. And I was like, it's a fish, man. Like for sure it's going to eat at some point and I'm going to catch it.
Yeah.
So I ended up like doing this big baiting campaign on this lake that had carp, and like we were having days of like 8 to 16 fish, and everybody from like Europe and stuff was like mind blown.
What?
Like I like defied the odds of like what carp do in the winter. And like plus I'm in Canada catching them in like January and February through two and a
Yeah.
half feet of ice. So like I had all these magazines approach me and I did all these magazine articles. So I started getting a little bit of a name for myself. And that spring I got really big into it. So I started like really Euro carping with like hair rigs and boilies and pop-ups and like the proper rod racks with like Delcom alarms and doing as
Hmm.
much research and at the same time competitions that I could do. And that led into like a 6 year like obsession where I only fished carp hardcore.
Wow.
Yeah. So it led to like a bunch of things, including the World Carp Classic, like you talked about.
That's amazing, man. So you dedicated yourself to carp for about 6 years.
Yeah. And that's kind of what, when I was growing up, that's kind of what I did. Like I grew up and my dad only fished walleye and trout. So I got really good at that until about 16. And then at 16, I started working at a lodge and doing like off species I didn't know, like big northerns, and doing a
Hmm.
little bit of competitive bass tournaments with the boat that the lodge would lend me. And so I did like, I was always wanted to do like a species and I'd set a goal for myself. And once
Yeah.
I got that size, well, then I'd move on to the next species. And I just tried to make myself like as well rounded as an angler as I could through like as many different species as I could. And when I got to carp, I got like hung up.
Right. Right. It's an underrated fish. It's funny that you say that because I fish a lot of salmon tournaments now and I'm getting into more bass tournaments, and a carp tournament was actually the first tournament that I did by myself. I mean, I grew up fishing salmon tournaments with my family where we'd all go out on the boat and fish it, but actually me being the sole angler in the tournament was actually a match style event with my buddy Jeff Turner, and he turned me on to the whole like keep net thing and
Yeah.
the really technical approach that I love. And I'm sure that's part of why you love it too, is you must be a really technical angler.
Yeah. And that is honestly what I fell in love with. I fell in love with all the gear and the fact that you could go and fish 24 hours a day for 4 to 7 days if you want. Just
Hmm.
it's like a big hangout on the bank with buddies. And like, yeah, your lines are in, but like if you don't want to work and you just want to relax, you can. But if you want to work, there's work to be done, feeding and
Yep.
tying rigs and learning all the different rigs to use in different situations, and like the length of your hair and the hook curve, everything changed so much, and like hook holds and everything. So like
Hmm.
the more you wanted to absorb, the better you could really get. And like here in Canada, when I was starting, it was like kind of just taking off, and there wasn't very many people doing it to a serious degree. So like I wanted to be that guy that like made a name for himself in carping. And that is honestly why I started my business, Cast and Conquer, because
Hmm.
I wanted to guide Europeans from Europe over here to fish carp. Because like in Europe, they fish a week sometimes for like 3 fish, where here,
Yeah.
like in my qualifier tournament, the Shimano Carp Cup, for when I went to France, the
Hmm.
tournament that we won to qualify, we had 105 fish in 3 days. Carp.
Oh, it's
Yes.
sickening, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, so it worked off like a weight thing. So like as long as it was over 10 pounds, you could weigh it. And they passed like twice a day. So like morning and evening. And you
Hmm.
had like we had 10 keep sacks, and you just keep fish in the keep sacks. And when they came, they'd weigh all your fish. Well, like by the end of the first like 12 hours, we had like 35 fish, and we hadn't like had more than like 5 minutes without a bite. So
Wow.
we ended up going like 40 hours, no sleep, no more than like 15 minutes between fish. And we ended up we stopped at, I think, 98 fish. And we finally went to sleep and slept like 7 hours. And it was already over at that point. We ended up winning with 1,877 pounds. And we had more than all the 14 teams combined.
No way.
Yeah.
It's incredible. What water body was that on?
So that was on the St. Lawrence River, just out of Longsu, which is like just below Cornwall.
Hmm.
And it's like world renowned for carp fishing. There was a guide there years ago. Jeff Vaughn was his name, and he was big into like guiding carp to the Europeans that would come here. And he made it that good because like he had strict baiting campaigns where he'd go out on like pontoon boats and like the big blue like olive barrels, the like four
Yep.
footers.
Yep.
Well, he'd fill like 6 of them with corn and drive around and dump barrels on spots.
Wow.
Like he made carp fishing there like so intense. That's why there's such a number of fish even there still to date.
Wow. That's crazy, man. I've never heard of that much bait going in and that dedicated. I knew guys did that at spots, if they wanted to grow a spot, they would
Yep.
go and they'd bait it hard, but that's incredible, man.
Yeah, so like when talking about bait, like when we went to France. So when I won in 2017 here in Canada. I
Yep.
won my trip to France with my partner that I won with. We got like all expenses paid, our flight paid, the entrance into the tournament was almost $3,000. That was paid. All our equipment was there, boat, motor. We just had to fly over like our rods and like end tackle and like basic stuff, our alarms. And
Yeah.
when we got there, we fished 7 days with like 40 some countries and 122 anglers or 122 teams of 4 anglers.
Mm-hmm.
And our sector that we fished in France, we didn't have a fish for 7 days, like 30 teams. So it just goes to show like how hard it is there. And
Yeah.
talking about bait, that's where I was going with this. Talking about bait, we ended up putting in 250 kilograms of bait in 7 days.
What?
Yeah, and we were like very low on the amount of bait we had compared to other teams. There were teams that were putting like 600 kilograms, not pounds, 600
Yeah.
kilograms.
So how did you source that? How did you get that there?
So we had a sponsor through Dynamite when we won. Actually, when we won, we didn't have a bait sponsor, but Simon from Carp Kit in Ontario, he
Mm-hmm.
was well with Dynamite. So he got us on with like having pretty much a full sponsorship. So like all our bait was supplied um to a degree. I think we had like 200 kilos and we ended up buying like 50 kilos of particle after like tiger nuts and like hemp
Yep.
seed. And yeah, so we ended up having that sponsor and we got there. It was literally like our car was already so full, plus we had a boat on the top, and then we got like 6 boxes of like boilies and like yeah, it was crazy.
Wow.
And then we had to get on a barge that started. So we arrived there. It was like 2 days of like partying with all the teams, and like the intro to like the tournament. Like there was a parade with all the countries and their flags. And
Yep.
when we started the tournament, like everybody gets on a barge that can't drive so they swim, and you get drove around on this huge barge and dropped off at all these spots. And it was crazy because where it was held was called Lac Medine in France, and this lake was man-made, and all like the structure in the lake was from when they had World War II and they had the trenches, and then after the war they filled it and made it a lake.
No way.
So like there was like memorials like right on the lake from the war, and like we found like musket balls on the beaches where we were like camping, and like yeah, it was a crazy experience.
Just for the viewers at home who maybe haven't seen a European event or who aren't familiar with how invested the Europeans are in carp fishing, it's incredible. And I do recommend, if you haven't seen it, look up some events on YouTube and check it out, because I mean, if you think that bass tournaments here are a big deal and people get hyped about them and you see the crowds, it's nothing compared to carp fishing over there. They're so passionate about it. And that, Andrew, man, that just must be so cool that you competed there and represented Canada.
Yeah, and it's funny because like there's a lot of countries when we were there, like they don't get like yeah, they have a reputation, but like to be Canada in France, we were like superstars. Like everybody loves Canada for some reason. So like we'd be walking in the parade with flags and like all these people are coming up to you to take pictures just because like we speak French in Canada and in
Yeah.
France they speak French. So like they loved us. We were like their brothers. It was yeah, it was crazy. So we met all these like really cool people, friendships that I still have to like to this day of guys that I talk to that message me and say like, oh, once COVID's done, I'm gonna come and do some carp fishing with you in Canada. And
Yeah. Oh man,
so
that's
yeah,
that's
it was
amazing.
yeah, pretty crazy.
What kind of techniques were you guys using when you're over there? Did you stick mostly to bottom fishing? Did you do any zigs or any waggler
So
fishing, anything like that?
yeah, so it's pretty crazy because like where we were fishing, like there's some swims where you could cast like out to where you wanted to fish, but it was a very weedy lake. So like finding your spots was super important. So we had to do like we couldn't cast. So like the guys that would cast would use like a marker float and lead around and find a spot with no weeds and then make sure it's the right bottom type and then cast right there with their bait and then cast their rods there. Well, we had like a 300, you could fish out to 300 meters from where you were. So
Okay.
we had weeds. We had 6 feet of water and 5 feet of weeds for about 250 meters. So we had to take the boat and go past the weed and then find open spots, mark them with marker buoys. And then our rods, we'd bring the rod in the boat, drive all the way to where the spots marked, drop some bait. We were using bottom rigs at the time,
Yeah.
10-ounce leads to make sure the line stayed super tight and above the weed. And then I was using like very long piece of hook link, like 12-inch hook link with like a 1.5-inch hair and tiger nuts or two giant like 25 millimeter boilies, everything on bottom.
Whoa.
So like the carp in the lake get up to like during the tournament, there were like 65 pounders caught, like giant carp. So they want to use these big baits to try to catch the big fish because there's a lot of like roach and bream and stuff that'll pick like a small
Yeah. Yeah.
pop up or and there's also Wells catfish, so like 200-pound catfish in there. So
Okay.
like there were certain baits that you wanted to use and certain baits not. Everybody told me tiger nuts because they can't get picked off by the little fish. And then
Yeah.
if I'm going boilies to use like the biggest boilies I could possibly use, like 225 mils.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd go out with the boat, find our clear spots with the sonar, drop our bait, drop our marker buoy, our line, and then you'd boat all the way back with a tight line with your drag fully loose, and then you'd make your line as tight as possible and put it up on
Wow.
the rack. So like we had every 100 yards from where we dropped our bait, we'd have like a bank stick that's sticking out of the water
Yep.
with a C hook on the top. And then at every 100 yards, we'd clip our line into that. So our line stayed above the water and above the weeds all the way out to 250 meters.
No way.
So like this was stuff I had never done before. Like I had boat fished leading
Yeah.
up to the tournament just to practice in case I got a swim like this. But like this was so far out of my element. And even though we didn't catch, I became such a good angler in the boat that when I go carp fishing now, I like to like because I've done a lot now. Like I went to France and like I feel like I kind of accomplished not everything, but like not that carping got boring. It's just like I
Yeah.
wanted like a crazy thrill all the time. So like I
Yeah.
love fishing at distance where like other guys can't reach. So like now when I go carp fishing, I'm always using the boat. I'm always fishing at 200 meters plus. And like
Mm-hmm.
the fight of a fish in the boat, like when you're from shore, you got to bring it in like horizontally towards you.
Yeah.
But when you're in a boat, you go out to the fish and then you fight it vertically. So it's totally different fights.
Wow.
And yeah, I fell in love with boat fishing now. That's the only way I want to fish carp really.
So you're fighting the fish in the boat.
Yeah, so like if my rod goes, I jump in the boat, put my life jacket on, and like I don't even try to reel him. I'm literally got my motor, my electric motor on like
Yeah.
2 or 3, and I'm just reeling up slack on a tight line. And I don't even have to steer because with the Zodiacs, they're so light on the top of the water that
Yeah.
I can just turn my rod like left or right, and that'll point the front of the boat towards the fish. So you just reel. And normally the boat's used for like if you're fishing over weeds or if you got a lot of rock or
Mm-hmm.
stumps and like you don't want to have to bring that fish through that structure. So
Yeah.
instead, you let him fight on the far end of the structure and you just reel yourself to him. And then once you're past it, you fight the fish into the boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. I didn't realize that when guys are using boats that's why they're doing it.
Yeah. And it's so precise. Like you have a marker buoy out and like what I want to do when I'm carp fishing, like when I first started, I'd spawn and set up a bait pile where I want the fish to feed, but like I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't being accurate. So I'm putting a spawn here, a spawn 15 feet over, a spawn 5 feet over, and like I'm making a very big baiting area,
Yeah.
which is good. You're gonna catch fish. But the more you condense that bait pile and make it say like the size of a hula hoop, and
Mm-hmm.
you can consistently cast, or with the boat, you can go and you have a marker buoy and you dump every time in the same spot. You're making like this dinner plate effect where like when fish come in, all the food is there, but it's very condensed. So they have to compete for it now. So instead
Yeah.
of coming in and using their big eyes and seeing a hook, or they're not even thinking about it. They're racing in, they're hitting the bait pile, they're feeding because they're competing to eat as much as they can
Mm-hmm.
before the other fish get there and eat it.
It's amazing, isn't it? That's one of my best my greatest teachers for carp fishing. His name's Pete Baxter, and he always used the dinner plate analogy with me too.
Yep.
I learned a lot of float fishing from him, and he said the same thing. He's like, if you can put your bread in the size of a dinner plate, you're going to catch more. And I use it when I'm catching bait fish. I use it when I'm catching carp. And it's so cool when you have that experience and you have success, and then you really understand it when that happens.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool, man. And like you said, with carp fishing, it could start off as simple as,
Corn on a hook.
exactly, carp like corn, go throw some corn out there and maybe catch a carp, right? Or you're fishing 200 plus away with a boat with sea hooks in the water, and it's still so cool.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody thinks like, oh, you got to buy all this expensive gear, but like when I started, I was fishing them with like Shimano FX $50 rod with like 20 to 30 pound braid and circle hooks with corn on them and sliding leads. Like my setup was worth like maybe $100, and like I'd still get fish in. But now, like when I go carp fishing, I'm bringing like I have like a crazy Mechanic of a D's rod pod. It's like $1,200, like aircraft aluminum, and like $200 Delcoms, and I'm putting 3 on the pod. And like my carp rods are like 13-foot, $1,500 each, and $1,200 reels on them. It's like you don't have to be at that level. You can still catch fish. It's just like for what I do at distance, and like I like to cast far too. Like I can cast about 160 meters. So like with the equipment I have, but if I downsize to something like a little cheaper in equipment, I may be casting 140. So because I'm a distance angler, I really like being able to get that high end gear to be able to reach like that greater distance.
That's amazing, man. It's so cool that there's somebody here in Canada, and I'm sure that you're not alone, but there's not many of you that are that dedicated and that have that knowledge to really to compete with the Europeans. It's incredible.
Yeah, so my goal's always been like, because once you go, you can't go there unless you've already gone. So unless you win a qualifier, or like you get invited by somebody that's already been. So now that I've already been, I can go back at any year. And Ross Honey, the organizer, he's asked me to go back the last 2 years, and I just couldn't with COVID. And I have 2 young kids. And so Canada's big plan when they passed the law, Ontario specifically, when they passed the law to have more than one rod in the water for carp while fishing, they passed that law last year. It was in thought of bringing the World Carp Classic to Canada, because they've wanted to for years now hold it in Toronto at the Toronto Islands, but they're not going to come unless, if the fact is that they can only fish with one rod. They need to be able to fish 2 rods each. So now that we're allowed to do that, it's supposed to be in the works where in the next few years, COVID permitting, they're going to bring that World Carp Classic to Toronto for all the countries to come to Canada to compete.
Maybe I should start training.
Yeah, man. So they held this tournament, the qualifier, like the first year was called the Shimano Carp Cup, and then the 2 years after, Fishing Canada actually took it over, and they held it. And the first year they held it, I won. The second year they held it, I got third, and then the third year they held it, I got third. So I've been like trying so hard to like win my spot back, but I think if it ever came back to Canada, I'd just pay the entry fee and go in.
Right. Wow, man, that's crazy. Can you just give a quick shout out for your business, what you do, how people can get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my business, Cast and Conquer, like you were saying, I'm a multi-species guide. I cover everything from panfish like bluegills, perch, crappies, all the way up to 50-inch gar, 50-inch muskie, 60, 70-inch sturgeon. And I do that all open water as well. I do guiding in the winter. So I'm doing muskie on the ice, which is only allowed in Zone 8 Quebec, where I guide. And we do a little bit of pike on the ice, crappies, and a lot of bay quinte walleye, mostly in the month of February. So I've been doing it for like 5 years now, and I went full time in September. So it is going so good. Like honestly, I know you're a guide as well, and it's so amazing to be able to do something that you love. And honestly, it's all because of the clientele too. That like we have such awesome clientele that keeps us going. So yeah, that's about the gist of it. I run a YouTube channel as well, Cast and Conquer, and it kind of helps me, my clientele, even before booking, see what kind of fish that I'm getting onto. So my YouTube channel is the same as my business name. It's Cast and Conquer, and it shows a little preview of kind of like the caliber of fish that we catch with outings, and like I have a bunch of clientele in my videos, and yeah, it's been great.
It's fantastic, man. Yeah, guys, go check out Andrew. check out his YouTube. I watched a few of his videos. Very, very good. And Andrew, I want to thank you again for joining the Love of Fishing podcast today.
Thank you, man. It was awesome.
Wow, I got to say, talking to Andrew has definitely fired me up to do some carp fishing this year. It's something that I don't often get a chance to do just with a busy guiding schedule and always being out on the boat. But it's something that I grew up doing, and I really have a soft spot for fishing for carp. If you love carp fishing, let me know in the comments below. Let me know what your PB is, and we do a weekly giveaway. This week's giveaway is brought to you by Whitewater Coffee Crew. Thank you to Kyle Morgan again for his support of the Love of Fishing podcast. Guys, if you drink coffee, check out the Whitewater Coffee Crew. He has a full lineup of coffees as well as a small food truck that he can bring to your event to vend coffee and other goodies. Check out Whitewater Coffee Crew, and thanks again, Kyle, for your support of the show. In order to win this week's giveaway, all you have to do is drop a comment of what is your PB carp, or let me know a little story about the last time that you went carp fishing or a memorable time that you went carp fishing. It's definitely one of those things that it doesn't take a whole lot of money or a whole lot of time to do, but it can be a lot of fun when you do latch into one of those big corn hogs. So, guys, I'd like to thank you very much again for listening to this week's episode of the Love of Fishing podcast. I hope that you found it entertaining and that you learned something. It was great to talk to Andrew, and don't forget, if you're in the Ottawa area, check him out. That's Andrew Walker at Cast and Conquer Guide Service. That brings us to the end of another week of the Love of Fishing podcast. Thank you again to Peter's Tackle for being our presenting sponsor of the show. Angela and her team run a fantastic shop in St. Catharines, Ontario. They have everything that you'll need for fishing in Niagara and beyond. Angela, thank you for your involvement in the fishing community and for your support of the Love of Fishing podcast. We'll be back next week with another great episode. You're not going to want to miss out on it. But until then, don't forget to get outside and go fishing. Peace. Ever since